We need to know, who the fuck is Deathspell Omega?
Deathspell Omega is a French avant-garde black metal band formed in 1998, notable for being one of the weirdest things to come out of France before Igor. Also, they are notable for being one of the only notable black metal bands to come out of France. Igor doesn't count since he's not black metal, Antaeus I'm not too familiar with, Misanthrope and Dagobah are anything but black metal, and mentioning Alcest alone in any positive light would ensure that this video is never uploaded. And also there's Worker. Check out Worker. Jesus Christ, just check them out. Overall, no matter what people may tell you in different Facebook groups or YouTube comment sections, France's black metal scene is kneecapped from its birth. Hell, France in general has been bent over ever since Waterloo. But at least in this context, less is more, because from what Deathspell Omega offers, I think France would rank pretty highly in the black metal department from that band's presence alone, no matter the relative lack of peers inside the country. All that being said, it still isn't fair to compare Deathspell Omega to any of their peers in the Norwegian or American scenes, because it's their third album where they take their craft into avant-garde, experimental territory, a whole different direction than usual black metal bands of the time. And shockingly, to me at least, it results in some very well-crafted, polished, and insane black metal that makes the band so well known amongst the people interested in watching this piece of shit. Initially more interesting than the band's music, however, is the background of the band itself, mainly due to its secrecy. Barely anybody knows much about who is in the band, at least by appearance. I want to believe that the pictures on Metal Archives of former members and some present members, but something keeps me from fully accepting those as legit. They have no official band photos, they don't perform live, they don't have an official site besides storefronts on Bandcamp and other retail sites, and they very, very rarely gave interviews even early on in their career, to say nothing of today. Good luck finding a verified official interview with Deathspell Omega's current form. What we do know for sure is that the band had started with 4 members. Shaxul is the lead vocalist, Johan on drums, Hazjarl on the lead guitar, presumably, and Chaos on the bass. That makes it actually easier for me to make this video because I can ditch a lot of the history that may have gone down that we never heard a peep about, and that leaves only the music to be talked about, which is the aim of this video anyway, so let's get right into it. We all know who Deathspell Omega are, but these talented musicians actually began as just another black metal band in the late 90s, to put it short. This was well after Vargius Brutus assassinated Euronymous Caesar and made black metal suddenly popular because controversy, stabby, church burnings, Norway, you suck. Deathspell is one of those bands whose material outside of their main discography is worth mentioning, but in advance, I won't. Just find somebody else to do that dirty work. Most people don't talk about the earlier years of the band before the third album, and some people even consider their third album to actually be their first album, but I'm not a revisionist, so don't worry. I will give my thorough analysis of these first 2 albums to please the relative minority in the comments who may just want to hear more about what other people think about these first 2 albums. After recording one demo after which Johan left the band, as well as a split with Moonblood from 1999 to 2000, the band released their debut full-length. Infernal Battles is as basic as a start as you can get with a band as notable as this, and is it good? No, not really. It's just your usual lo-fi black metal, nothing really new is shown, skip. More of the same, no convincing me otherwise, skip. So after Inquisitors, Shaxul departed from the band, citing his distaste with their change in theme to Orthodox Satanism, as if regular Satanism in the lyrics was the safe zone. So the band got a dude named Mikko Aspa to fill the role of lead vocalist to this day, and now we get to their third album, which I won't bother pronouncing. Yeah, chances are none of you can either, but I'm not gonna run the risk of some Satanist nerd saying, actually, it's Circvmspice sau Monvmentvm Reqvires Circvmspice. What strikes me as odd about this album Okay, that was stupid wording. Let me try again. What strikes me as odd about the reception to this album is that even though from this point onwards they are widely regarded to be pretty high up in the rankings, according to Metal Archives, this is their second lowest rated album? What? I mean, I get that. No, wait, no. There were very few fans of the band before this album. Never mind, scratch that point I was about to make. There's really no reason that Inquisitors of Satan should have a higher average with less votes. You absolute idiots. This is Deathspell. Not that. Take your raw black metal worshipping asses out of here before I find the nearest paddle and force you into the Echoes Chamber. So we open up with a repetitive intro, and then after that the first real song plays, and we get to hear this new change in sound that everybody praises for Deathspell Omega. To be honest with you, maybe it's because I've grown used to modern extreme music, which is even more off the walls than Deathspell was at the time, but this doesn't sound like too much of a departure from black metal like Darkthrone or Urgahal production aside. It definitely has a more technical edge with some odd time signatures scattered throughout, such as on Sola Feed the Second, I don't fucking know. And one can argue that the structure of the tracks is at least somewhat unpredictable, but I'd still say that this isn't too jarring if you came from something like Transylvanian Hunger, or the Burzum self-titled. It's got the same riffing style, the same reliance on blast beats, the same fuzzy production, although better and more audible than anything in the Norwegian scene. It's basically black metal 2.0, and it's pretty good to hear after those first two piles of donkey shit. I really can't put my finger on just one thing that makes this album tick, but I've got like 11 fingers total, so I'll just start groping. I guess for one, the drum performance is great, but that's an iffy thing to say. They certainly sound real to me, but since there's no credits to be found for drumming, and Johan, the only credited drummer, left the band many years before this album, I'm skeptical. My current guesses are that they either got a session drummer to fill the role and sent his part over Firewire to not expose the current lineup identities, or they got a session drummer and then threatened him with a Bowie knife to his throat to not reveal any details about the lineup, or the final option, their lineup has been so secretive in the past until this point that nobody has even attempted to identify the drummer yet, and everybody just assumes that they have one, which is probably the least likely angle, but hell, anything goes with this band. Anyways, the drumming is spot on, with the production mixed just right to where every smack just feels so satisfying. Like when I smack my 2-month-old out-of-wedlock daughter and she doesn't cry anymore. Anyways, tom rolls are galore on this album, and none of it is sloppy. It's actually very distracting at times, but for all the right reasons. I'm not gonna lie, there are points where they certainly sound unrealistically well done, like on some particular segments on Blessed Are the Dead Which Die in the Lord. But I think we could probably rule out a computer doing this. But enough of the drums, we got guitars now to think about, and boy have I done some thinking. Again, not necessarily unique compared to their contemporaries. I mean, this is black metal we're talking about. It was a scene that celebrated itself before shoegaze came along. But the guitar work is also pretty well done. The riffs have potential to be memorable had I not chosen to bang my head repeatedly on a hard floor as a toddler. That part's actually a true story. I told it on stream once. They're off the walls on this album guitar-wise, and that's great. What isn't so great is how the guitars sound. Whereas the drums are nearly perfect, the guitars seem to be just a tad too low in the mix. They definitely are not inaudible, and nothing's like overpowering it, but all things considered, with distortion and sidechaining, if black metal musicians even did that, they could be maybe 1.5 decibels higher, and it would be perfect. I'd hear more of the melodies and the technical riffs that are in abundance, and not lose that fuzzy, abrasive distortion that black metal inherently has. The bass is... it's a bass. The vocals are, unsurprisingly to me at least, the point where I really don't care. True, Miko doesn't do frog croaks the whole album, and they're very clear in the mix, like relatively clear compared to the guitars, and the echo adds some more atmosphere to an already somewhat atmospheric album. But their vocals, I can understand what he says in points, which is commendable for a black metal album, but their vocals, nonetheless. I've seen some people outright say that the problem with everyone that reviews Deathspell Omega is that they never focus on the lyrics. I disagree. I mean, yeah, lyrical content and themes are a big part of how this band has changed their style, and it is why Shaxel left, but me personally, lyrics have never been a strong point in metal for me, unless they're cleans. in which case my only concern is their suck factor. It's not that I can't understand harsh vocals or I have baby ears or whatever you want to say, it's just that for me, whenever screaming, croaking, or growling is used, I see it more of an atmospheric additive, something to add a layer of aggression, desperation, abrasiveness. There definitely are some metal albums where the writing outright fucking sucks, and that should be a talking point. But for me, I'm just generally less concerned. That's more of a hip-hop reviewer's territory. And seeing how I was one at one point, that's all the more reason why I shouldn't bloat the commentary anyways. Plus, I doubt anybody who truly has a good taste cares. One final note about the vocals though, the band starts to include Gregorian themes like choral singing, and overall just more orthodox references like I noted before. Musically, the choirs add even more atmosphere, and although we don't hear very much of them outside of Carnal Malefactor, which is still a great song, I just wish they incorporated the choir more into the other songs on this album. Let's talk about the album cover next. Some people seem to take genuine issue with babies being on an album cover, calling it disturbing to them for some reason they can't tell. And while this baby does look like my daughter, I really don't know how this can disturb anyone. It's just a baby with wings and some weird map under his crotch. There's nothing disturbing about that. Length of the album. Okay, this is easy. I don't have a problem with an hour and 20 minutes of this because damn does it fly by quick with everything I've just said considered. I've found myself at 2:30 AM still listening to this album at some points. There's just so much to it, and yet despite the length, it doesn't feel too long or drawn out because there's enough variation and interesting directions taken that it really never gets stale. Yet it's consistent enough and keeps a steady tone to where I can just let it play in the background, and that's perfect for any album. Would I have said in the past that it is repetitive? Maybe. And I can see how somebody could say that here, but chances are if you think it's repetitive and that's the main thing blocking your enjoyment of this album, you probably don't like black metal anyways. And I don't like a lot of black metal myself, yet I like this, so you probably like nothing and are a sociopath, which is good. I got a Discord group full of people just like you. It's called the Downfall Network Skype channel. Okay, I have nothing else to call out. This album is great, a definite step up from Inquisitors of Satan. It's filled with energy, great ability, the production is great. Could be a bit better. It hooks me into what they'll do next. And in 2007, what they released is an album highly regarded. More so than C Monvmentvm. 90% scores or more on average on the archives, but who listens to those nerds anyways? An album that I will only refer to as Fas, but the full title being Fas, Ite Maledicti in Ignem Aeternum. Like the artwork, this album also seems different than the prior, although following the same chaotic lines. It delves into some suspenseful moments right off the start with Obombration, and then smacks you across the face with the Shrine of Mad Laughter, a balls-to-the-wall, amped-up version of what Monvmentvm showed in a nutshell. Right away, this album is going to be better than the prior. And the production is also much more enjoyable. The guitars are higher in the mix, like I said before, and nothing's sacrificed for that. Yeah, it may sound like an indiscernible wall of sound at some points due to everything happening at once, but production-wise, I could not ask for more. While we don't reach obscura levels of what the fuckery on this album, it would certainly feel that way just from the first song alone. Over 10 minutes of every instrument in the studio being thrown at you with incredible force, and yet it's so collected and well done that it's hard to believe that this is even an organic recording despite the breaks of ambience and downright unsettling structures populating this album. It's turning me into a pitchfork reviewer. In fact, scratch what I said about the second song being an amped up version of C Monvmentvm. This whole album is C Monvmentvm on crack. There's various moments that give me a large spook attack, notably on two back-to-back songs, The Repellent Scars of Abandon and Election and A Chore for the Lost. The songs will go very quiet and subtle 1 second, and then lovingly punch you in the groin with insane blast beats and off-the-walls tempo switch-ups the next minute. It's impossible for me to pick highlights or favorite songs off of these albums because not only do they all pretty much sound high tier in technical ability and consistency, but there's pretty much no way you'll get me to listen to individual songs alone. For me, the whole album may as well be one song because it's an experience that's only complete as a whole. So all things considered, I cannot say much else. It's C Monumentum 2 Electric Boogaloo. No, not even Electric Boogaloo, Nuclear Boogaloo. Once again, they deliver beyond standard, and for the next album, what are they gonna throw at us in the studio this time besides their drum kit? In 2010, they threw Paracletus at us. So I should probably mention that this album and the last two before it make up a trilogy in the eyes of the fanbase, and it's easy to see why. They're all pretty much continuations of one another, albeit getting more experimental, atonal, and jarring than the last. And Paracletus is no exception, although this time in my opinion, they bring much more catchiness to the table. Now, some people claim C Monumentum and Foss have equally catchy, if not catchier riffs and melodies, but me personally, I find the riffs on Paracletus to stick out in my head more, especially on Wings of Predation, although that's likely because that song tones down the ferality by half to deliver said memorability. Abscission is also an example where a riff just sticks with me, particularly the opening. I noticed that it's on the more conventional segments where more memorability happens with this band, which does seem silly considering it's the atonality and random switch-ups in tempo and signatures that make Deathspell such an amazing band to listen to. Some could argue that because this album is less off the walls than Foss, it would be less of what makes Deathspell good and therefore an inferior album. I disagree there because Deathspell is good when they're consistently switching things up, both in their music and their songwriting between albums, and this is another example of both. Paracletus contains many more changes that I could spend at least 30 minutes going over, but I've written like, I don't know, 2 paragraphs about it already without even going into the main review, so I think I've said enough about comparisons. This album primarily switches things up by making it more about the mellow moments to build up the themes and atmosphere, while still keeping in line with Foss by sending in the blast beats to keep boredom from setting in. Which, now that I think about it, boredom was somewhat of an issue on Foss. Yeah, Foss kept throwing random shit at me, and it was definitely better than the prior album, but eventually I just kind of got into the groove and wasn't necessarily impressed at certain intervals once I began to recognize like every trope that the band used. Here on Paracletus, I am not bored at all. The production suits this album, bringing a sort of warmness to the melodies, while keeping the abrasiveness of black metal alive. It is toned down and brings the band back to more predictable song structures, but that's what makes the album stand out in this so-called trilogy. It doesn't go in quite the same direction as Monvmentvm, yet it's still very comparable to Foss and Monvmentvm. Also, there's some pretty eerie things they accomplish here melodically. At the end of Malconfort, there's a guitar riff that sounds unlike any riff I've heard from any band before. So again, to cut it really short, it's been changed up, and it concludes the so-called trilogy, which brings me to their latest album. In 2012, the band had recorded an EP titled Draught, and based on how it was released, people tend to equate it as sort of an epilogue to the trilogy. And after 4 years, another mainline studio album came. Now why is this one left out of that trilogy, and instead not attached to it to make a quadrilogy? I don't know. Do they take another step forwards? One back? One sideways?
Let's find out.
In 2016, the band released as of writing their most recent full-length, Synarchy of Molten Bones. To be quite honest, because of the string of good albums that we've been having before, not you, I was expecting this one to be mediocre. Maybe a turn into modern black metal. Otherwise, I was expecting something similar, at least to Foss, because Paracletus was more akin to Monvmentvm, and that would only make more sense to release a more energetic album after Paracletus to kinda keep with the consistency. Or I guess lack thereof. And on the far end of what I expected, there was the possibility that what I'd hear would be ultimately a retread of prior techniques and themes. Their last full length was 6 years prior. We aren't counting EPs in this retrospective. That's enough time to lose track of what makes the music good, and simply just recreate what happened on a prior release, either as a throwback or for fans to be like, yeah, more of the same, yay! It doesn't have to show any progression on the side of the artist or bring anything new to the table. Alright! I'm Zach Johnson! So, what did we get, and what do I gather from it? Well, believe it or not, the least expected option that I just described is what's happened on Synarchy of Molten Bones. And while I have praised the trilogy endlessly for the hyperactive energy and diversity in sound it had, around this point in Synarchy, it's starting to wear out its welcome, and at the end of the day, I consider this one to be one of their weakest albums. Although there definitely are worse releases, there's still some interesting segments, such as some of the vocal layering on the last few minutes of Famished for Breath, an inhuman scream on the third track, and the opening riff on the title track. But even then, the vocal layering was done better on Paracletus, and the opening riff is probably their weakest opening riff to kick off an album thus far. So even most of the interesting bits on this album falter when you compare them to the previous releases. Plus, this record is much shorter than prior ones, being just shy of 30 minutes in length with only 4 songs. I guess I can be optimistic and say they trimmed it down to condense the uniqueness and most of the good stuff and save the rest for future releases, but if this right here is what they show, it just makes me wonder what didn't make the cut and if I should be grateful or not. I couldn't see myself hating this album. In fact, listening to it, I'm still entertained. It is Deathspell Omega after all, and for their studio albums, they haven't done much wrong. Musically, it's the most similar to Paracletus, so there's that. I was kind of right in that regard. Otherwise, it's worth a listen if you're more of a diehard fan than I am, but after hearing the whole trilogy, it's hard to find anything that'll stick out further than it does. And so we come to the end of the Deathspell Omega retrospective. Are they a good band or are they alright? They may have had a rocky start and they've made a few slips recently, but they've stuck true to their direction and it's gotten them this far with a devoted fanbase and a rather impressive catalog filled with examples of great technical, songwriting, and production ability. So I think it's safe to say that despite me only adoring half of their albums at most, I still regard them as a great band, and one of the first recommendations I have for anybody looking to get into some more extreme music. Because at the end of the day, it's not just black metal or avant-garde black metal or progressive orthodox satanist avant-prog blackened metal. It is extreme metal. And how many better examples of extreme can you find than Deathspell Omega?
Yo, what the fuck? Subscribe.
That is actually bad.
Shut the fuck